You know, there was a congregant at Buena Vista who once told me that the mark of a church, or like sort of the church that he would want to attend, well, he would know because the pastor would preach without notes. And I thought, is he talking to me? Because, you know, I spend a lot of time writing my sermons. And I like to read my sermons to some extent, only because I really take the time to choose the words. But at the same time, you know, I recognize every time I would go to junior high camp, the summer camp, there's no way you can like write out a sermon and be like, hello, 100 junior high campers, let me read something to you, right? So I put on my ministry plan that I shared with the staff parish committee last Sunday, that one of the things that I would be working on is my own preaching skills, right? The vitality of preaching and the ability to share a word that is meaningful and relevant and yet calls us and challenges us and is authentic in the moment. So I invite you into a moment of prayer. Oh God, as your nudging comes in so many ways, sometimes from the voice of a bossy mother, sometimes from a nosy congregant. May our hearts be wide open to know and to listen, that your voice comes in so many ways. And even when we resist, and even when we feel vulnerable, taking a step out brings us into miracles. We pray this in the name of our creating, redeeming, and loving God. Amen. So you do know I'm going to experiment today, right? And as I've always said, I really want to invite you into the process of feedback and helping me and us grow together. So the thing that I want to share as we begin is this thought that it was at junior high camp. Very creative name, isn't it? Can you tell who it's for? At the junior high camp ministries of the Japanese American United Methodist Church Caucus, they sort of hosted this for the last 30 years, actually. And some of you, I know, some of our young folks have been a part of junior high camp or their senior high counterpart, the even more creative name of Asian American summer camp. But, you know, I went 5 years ago. I started getting involved with the camping ministries about 5 years ago and was sort of resistant at the beginning. I didn't have any camping ministry experience myself growing up. I didn't go to camps. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a summer camp with church or whatnot. Oh, not a whole bunch, okay. So it was sort of a small group, and I was kind of like, I'm not into fun. That's the other thing, right? And so like this whole idea that you like throw food at each other, run around and stay up late, I was not very into that. But it was at junior high camp that really I got turned around. And I really want to say that over the 5 years of seeing sort of these 100 campers come together to learn and love and laugh together, and also to witness the 30 to 40 odd youth and young adults that would come together to plan and design it and then lead the camp, that I was converted. I was transformed. And so I do hope that sometime we might, as a church, also be able to get involved into the miracles that are happening out there in the woods somewhere. But it was at the camp that I met this young man named Mike. Now, Mike, you know, is not the immediately lovable guy, but Mike, I say that in the kindest of ways. Mike was one of those guys who loved junior high camp way more than me. He was the kind of guy that started going to camp when he was in junior high, right? Remember yourself in 6th or 7th or 8th grade, right? He went to this camp and he loved it so much that he went all 4 years that he could. And at the first chance he got, he became a counselor. And he did that not only through the rest of high school, but all throughout college. Now, for those of you who remember college years, you're not trying to muck around with junior highs for very much longer, right? But he did it. Then he graduated, and he didn't stop. he became the worship leader and coach, right? So I had a lot to learn from Mike. He was sort of gruff around the edges. He loved to pull pranks. He sort of had that like bossiness, like, come here, do that, children. Yet he worshiped passionately. And he felt this tugging to the pastoral ministry, right? So every couple of months, especially after I became the pastoral advisor, I would check in with him about this. And he would hum and he would haw and he would say, oh, I don't know, now's not the right time. I have to do this, or I have to change that, or I have to, whatever it was, right? But seminary was always like over there for him, like not quite yet. And he would just say, Emily, it's not my time. And I have to admit, I was sort of like Mary. I was like, I think it is your time, right? But I have to also say, I know exactly what Mike was experiencing, right? And you might think to yourself, well, do I know what Mike is experiencing when he says, nah, man, it's not my time, and I have to do X, Y, and Z before that moment comes. I haven't often shared sort of my own call story, and I've often thought of, oh, when might I do that? But I want to share with you that I know Mike's resistance very, very intimately and deeply myself. During my first stint in seminary, and this was back in 2001, I deliberately went from the Masters of Divinity program, and I switched out of it a year later to the Masters of Theological Studies program. Because even though I trusted and I believed that God was calling me to something, I was pretty sure that the pastoral ministry was sort of hokey, and that all these pastors to be were like a little bit on the nutty side and very unpredictable, and I really kind of didn't want anything to do with them. So I thought, okay, I want to go to seminary, so the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to switch out of the program, right? The other thing is I just kept working all the time at Buena Vista, nevertheless. But here's the thing. At Buena Vista, every single year I would do this. I would meet with the SPRB, and I would ask them to re-interview me, right? I would be like, and I would only commit to signing 1-year ministry contracts at a time. This is before I realized the itinerant ministry does the same thing, right? So I would say, I will only sign 1-year contracts because, I don't know, maybe this will be the year. This will be the year finally that the God's voice, right, becomes so clear, and I will finally know what my purpose is. So never mind that all along the way, like people were saying, oh, Emily, are you good? Are you on the track yet? Are you doing what you're supposed to do to get ordained? Never mind that, I would preach and people would be like, I would really encourage you to seriously think about the pastoral ministry. Never mind that, right? Who knew, right? I didn't think God was speaking through other people. I mean, who thinks that, right? Duh. So it came to a point in time where I finally realized that maybe I should put both feet into being of service at Buena Vista. That came as a big transition. And it was in that transition that Michael Yoshi, the senior pastor, then said to me, Emily, I would like to make 3 requests of you, right? I'd given up my 1-year contract business, and I said, okay, I'm fully here. And so he said, okay, 3 requests. And he said, I want you to go to annual conference, which is this annual meeting of everybody, clergy and lay members, every year in the middle of June. It happens often in Sacramento. I've only experienced it in Sacramento. He said, I want you to go not just for a day, I want you to go for the whole thing. Number 1. Number 2, I want you to convene a discernment circle here at Buena Vista. People that will listen and pray and talk with you about your call. And the third thing was I want you to start preaching once a month. And I have to say, I was very angry. I have secret visions of anger in my mind, right? And I was really angry because I was like, how dare he? Who is he to ask these things of me? So as a good Taiwanese young person and mentee, I assented to only one thing, to give him some face, And as a good American young person and mentee, I said no thank you to the other 2. Because I thought, what the heck? I go to annual conference. They can't get me. Nothing can break me down. The annual conference is just a big, long, boring meeting for 4 days, right? Well, the rest, as they say, is history. So I want to think about, the sense of timing. Because at the same time that I went through all of that, it's been only in retrospect, that I realized that sometimes, even through much prayer and discernment, our own sense of timing may not be aligned with God's timing. And sometimes, it does take a demanding pastor, a bossy mother, a nosy friend, sometimes even an accident or a random circumstance to budge us past all the barriers and blindness that we have into God's call for us. Take a deep breath, if you would. Ben shared at the beginning of service that today is Human Relations Day, and the United Methodist Church suggests that it be held on the Sunday closest, of course, to Martin Luther King's national celebration of his birthday. That happened, of course, on the 15th. So I took the opportunity to do a little reading about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, because, of course, I thought, this man could not have been always so gung-ho, like, yes, let me do whatever it is that he wanted to do. And then I found this book called Becoming King, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Making of a National Leader. The author, Troy Jackson, attempts to chronicle the way King emerged as a civil rights leader in relationship, however, with the people of Montgomery. And he asks a really interesting question to me at the very beginning of the book, in the introduction. He asks, what if King had never accepted the call to preach at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery? What if King had never accepted the call to preach? What if, did you realize that at that time, Reverend King was only around 25, 26 years old? That he was sort of just finishing up his PhD at Boston University, and that he was actually considering tons of different career options. And in fact, most people that do take the time and take the trouble to get their PhDs have a tendency to yearn for and think about an academic career, right? So what if King had taken a teaching gig instead, which I'm sure was coming his way? The question Jackson raises, is it interesting just because, whoa, how different would King's own life be if he had taken a different decision, but also in considering the power of timing, that way that things, all the different personal and individual decisions come together at a particular moment to then create a whole world of new possibilities. We certainly might think back over our own lives, right? Think back over your own lives, those major decisions sometimes we think of. Anybody watch that movie Sliding Doors way back when? Excellent! I have a friend in the congregation. It was a whole story about a moment, right, when the subway doors closed and what would happen if the woman, the main character, got on the train and the rest of her life, and if the doors closed right in the moment and she hadn't got on the train. But we might think about our own lives. Oh, what if I hadn't married the person next to me? Right? What if that happened? What if I wasn't at this place, at this moment, at that time, and didn't make the decision? What if I didn't take that job and end up here? What if I hadn't quit that job and had done this? There's a whole host of possibilities. But the question for us might be, how are these decisions possible openings, even the smallest one, for God's timing to break into our lives and thus into the lives of all those who are connected to us? In our scripture today, right, Jesus is at a wedding with his mama and some of his friends. It's a good thing to realize that Jesus had a social life too, right? He wasn't just spitting in blind people's eyes or getting in trouble with the authorities or raising dead people up, but he was out there sort of seeming to have some fun. But while he's trying to have a good time, what happens? His mom comes over to him and says, son, they're running out of wine. In the Message paraphrase that Peggy read, it says that she said, they're just about out of wine. Now, it's helpful to remember in the first century, weddings were 7 days affairs. These were not like a couple of hours when you go to Legendary Palace and you like do a couple of toasts and everybody goes home at the end of the night, right? It's not even like a day-long thing, but 7 days. Holly and Donnie, how long was your wedding? Right? And the question this isn't just about wine, because wine was sort of the normal beverage at meals, right? So for all of us who think like, us Christians cannot drink, we were talking about this earlier. Actually, this was the normal beverage of the meals, but particularly it was important at festivities and ceremonies, right? Because wine was the symbol of joy. There was even an ancient rabbi who was quoted as saying, let me find it. Without wine, there is no joy. Now, I don't know if we would want to go so far, right, to say that, because at the same time, drunkenness was a great disgrace throughout scriptures. The point here, though, is that Mary discovers and shares with her son that there is a sort of social emergency happening. And like a typical child who can't be bothered to do whatever his mama asks, Jesus responds by asking her, what does this have to do with you and with me? Is it any business of ours? For those of you who are parents or have worked with young people who've just try to get a little kindness and thoughtfulness out of them, you might be thinking, that is the ultimately unhelpful answer. There you are trying to help your child practice some loving kindness, and what do? They throw it back in your face. Now, you might be thinking along with Jesus, though, really, come on, really, what is this business of ours? Like, okay, I get it, okay, the wine is running out, but really, not to be mean or anything, right? What does it have to do with us that the wine is running out? Well, the tradition in those days was that weddings were community affairs, and that good friends of the wedding folks, the wedding celebrants, would send wine to the family days ahead of time so that it could be used for the wedding. So you can imagine, right? What it implies is that if you run out of wine during the wedding, it would be like at a Chinese banquet running out of food. I know, gasp. Right? If you ran out of wine, it was almost like saying you were lacking of friends. Now, if Jesus, here's what it has to do with Jesus, right? If Jesus was really a friend, he would actually care, because it would then be a reflection of him. Like, what, you're not a good enough friend to send over enough wine? But Jesus goes on and says in this Message paraphrase, this isn't my time. Don't push me. Now, I definitely think that's Eugene Peterson's edition. Don't push me? What? Right? But we can hear, right? For us, we're like thinking, whoa, that's a little bit of an impolite son we got going on. I find it enormously fascinating that Jesus hesitates to get involved, claiming it's not my time, right? We might think of this excuse of maybe thinking, maybe it's not such a big deal. Right? The Jesus we know was much more inclined. He never turned down like people that were like blind or needed healing or needed reconnection. Maybe this is like too small of a deal for him, right? Maybe he was like, give me something big. bring me something, and then I'll get involved. Or maybe, right, we need to sort of cut back our tendency to actually give Jesus too much of the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he actually thought, in his mind, this isn't my time. But like all mothers out there, well, not all mothers, but many mothers, right, who've asked their child to do something, Mary simply ignores Jesus, right? And goes ahead and calls the servant over and tells him, do whatever he tells you to do. How many of you parents have done that? You're like, oh, you don't want to do that? Okay, do it. You see, some commentators have glossed over this point with Mary. And I actually love Mary in this story. Because what they've done is some people have said, Mary, who is she? A human being telling Jesus, God, what to do. How dare she, right? Other people have just kind of moved past that whole thing and gone straight to the fact that, the miracle of water into wine. Not just a little bit, but we would read in some translation that these 6 stoneware jars held, 20 to 30 gallons each. So what we're talking about is Jesus turned approximately 180 gallons of water into fine wine. Ari shared, if I might, is it okay for me to share? Earlier, I really appreciated this point because she was sort of very keen on the servants' perspectives. Because she was sharing, having her experience all in Uganda and thinking about drawing water from the well. That's no easy thing. You don't just go tell somebody to go fill up 6 bathtubs full of water, because that involves people like hauling water from point A to point B, back and forth and back and forth. How much water do you think somebody can carry, right? And yet, that's exactly what happens here. So Mary goes ahead. And part of the thing that we might think about is maybe Mary, Jesus' mother, the woman to whom the angel Gabriel came to and said, you are going to have a special child, knew something, believed something about Jesus more than Jesus even knew or believed about himself. The theologian Carol Lakey Hess writes, like Mary, perhaps we have a role in the story. This troubling text invites us to trust so much in God's generosity and abundance that we, like the perceptive mother of Jesus, nudge God with our observation. They have no wine. And ultimately, like a dutiful son to both his earthly mother and his heavenly creator, Jesus does go ahead and turn the water into wine, right? Somewhere in the midst of this great miracle, I think we have to acknowledge that perhaps, like Jesus, we don't have to be ready. We don't even have to be 100% willing. But sometimes stepping into Jesus or God's time requires that we listen to people that we label bossy or persistent. Because sometimes others see us for who we are and who we're called to be even more clearly than ourselves. We know that according to John, this miracle became Jesus' first sign, a sign that pointed to something beyond that symbol of joy, that wine, and to the giver of that abundant joy. Coming back to Reverend King for just a moment. On the morning after, I'm sorry, these are new glasses, so I have to keep, they're not adjusted quite right yet, so if you're like, why is she pushing it up again? I'm feeling the same way. On the morning after Rosa Parks was arrested, one of the key figures in the NAACP at the time started calling all of the African American ministers in Montgomery, asking them to come together and get involved into organizing the bus boycott. Because even though it was just going to be one day, they were trying to get together and think about the timing of the moment. And it's interesting to note, again by Troy Jackson, the writer, that when Brother Nixon called Reverend King, he actually hesitated. He asked Brother Nixon actually that he needed some time to think about it and to call him back. Now, we don't know what he did with his time. He probably was praying, probably thinking about it. There are a lot of things to consider. What did you say at that time? Montgomery was deeply, deeply in the throes of segregation. But it's interesting that Brother Nixon went and did something that I think was a little bit like Mary. Brother Nixon went ahead and kept calling down the line through all of the pastors. And when he came back to Reverend King, he asked the question, are you ready to support? And the answer was finally, Reverend King said, yes, I'll support this thing. He said, good, because I've invited 18 other people to be at your church tonight, right? So in some ways, Brother Nixon was acting in that role of nudging and budging, of making possible something even when there was resistance. As we mark Human Relations Day this Sunday and hold in our hearts the great devastation and ongoing suffering in Haiti, may we give up a little bit of our own sense of control and timing over to a God who longs to provide abundant joy in cups, in bodies, and in spirit, to us and to all through us. And may we, like Mary, trust so much in God's love and generosity that we remain steadfast through prayer and through action in nudging God to attend to the places and people that have no wine. Amen. Would you please take a deep breath and consider